Okay, your case studies are going to be simultaneously some of the simplest and most complicated forms of qualitative data. A case study is where you talk to one person or a group of people very extensively to learn about one situation or one event or a person's life. For example, a very famous case study is the case study of Jeannie. Jeannie was a child who was extremely neglected and found when she was a young teenager, I think like 13 or 14. But she looked like she was 9 years old because she had been so badly neglected. At the time she was found, she couldn't speak. She didn't understand normal interactions between people, and she just hadn't developed. She was a case study. People interviewed her and worked with her and learned everything they could about her because she was an interesting subject. People learned as much as they could about how she developed language, because developing language later in life helped us understand what things are important about developing language early in life. An interesting thing about case studies is that usually case studies are done on strange examples, exceptions, because those strange situations help us understand the more common ones. A big question for the case study of Jeannie was whether or not you need to learn languages at a very young age, because maybe language acquisition, learning to speak, has something to do with your biology. And if you don't learn a language at the correct age, you biologically can no longer learn language later on in life. And truth be told, Jeannie learned how to speak, but she never learned very good speech. And the conclusion there was that there is a certain age at which you need to learn to speak, or by which you need to learn to speak, because your body is ready, your mind is ready to learn language at that time, and past those years, past that period, it's much harder to learn it, or not even possible to learn language. There's a lot more about the Jeannie case study, and as part of the activity for this section, you'll actually watch a short video. I think it's actually 10 or 14 minutes long, and comment on it, because I want you to see what a case study is like, and also because this section is very short. What do you need to be careful about with case studies? Well, lots of different things. Of course, the validity stuff that we've talked about so far is really going to pop up. In a case study, if you're learning about a person's life or one specific event, the information you're gathering is highly specific, and you can use that information to draw conclusions and inferences about the rest of the world, but you have to be careful about whether you can actually generalize, whether that information is valid. It could be that Jeannie could not learn language, but that other people who failed to learn language at an early age could learn it later on in life with more modern techniques. Another thing about that is that highly specific information is still very useful, right? So you could work with a child, you could work with Jeannie for hours and hours and hours and really understand things about her. Other case studies include people who had really, really bad memories. There's a very famous case study about a man who had a 30-second memory, and we learned so much about how memories work and about how amnesia works from that person, and that highly specific information was incredibly valuable. So I'm not trying to say that case studies are bad in terms of validity, but that you need to be aware of those validity concerns. Another thing about case studies is that they allow for extensive methods, and what I mean here is that for Jeannie, you could do a bunch of different experiments. You could have a bunch of researchers work with her. You could watch her and learn about her over the course of the rest of her life. That gives you the opportunity to gather so much data. In quantitative research, we try to gather a little bit of information from a lot of people to draw conclusions that are true for most people. In case studies, we gather a lot of data from one person or one group of people so that we can really understand how they work and see if that can be generalized to the rest of the world. We of course know that the data from a case study is going to be totally valid. What I mean there is, if you have someone complete a survey, They may not answer it honestly, but if you work with a person for a case study for so many years, you're going to get to know that person very, very well. And so you can trust that the data you have is accurate for that person. Finally, non-directional research. What do I mean here? Well, let's say that you want to learn about what age people need to learn speaking. When you're working through that in a qualitative way, you're going to do experiments and you're going to have a pre-existing notion as to what you think is going to happen. But when you're working with a case study like Jeannie, you might try every single thing you can to teach Jeannie language. And the answer isn't necessarily can she learn or can't she, but how much? What methods work? What types of information can she learn versus what can't she learn? And so you don't necessarily have a specific goal in mind other than to learn what there is to see. So that helps deal with some of the validity issues that quantitative data have. If I was to draw one conclusion about qualitative data from all of this information, it's that qualitative information is valuable and dangerous, just like quantitative data is valuable and dangerous. And the best way to use it is in conjunction with quantitative. If you're trying to understand, how well do the majority of fifth graders know how to speak? You can gather data from 5,000 fifth graders, but you might also want to do a couple of case studies with a few fifth graders to learn lots of in-depth information about just those few and see how well that matches up with the quantitative data from the 5,000 other kids. More information is always going to be your best bet to really understanding how the world works. I hope quantitative data is interesting to you. I hope you know that it's a lot of work, but it's also very beneficial work. It's not something that I've really been involved in my life, but I hope you know that if you want to do qualitative research, there are so many avenues for it. If you work as a social worker, if you work as a psychiatrist, if you work almost in any place, you're going to always gather qualitative data by making friends with people or just as part of the job. And those same things that you need to be careful about in the real world are going to be true for qualitative data, but those same valuable bits about that information will also be true. All right, that's it for the material and qualitative data. In the next section, we'll talk briefly about posters and conferences, and it's going to be really kind of laid back information, so I hope it's interesting.